The auctioneer's gavel fell on a pile of ash and charred timber for 17 silver marks, and Yannick Vance became the owner of what had once been Thornbreak, an orc village that a regiment of border militia had burned to the ground 3 months prior on suspicion of harboring deserters. He stood now at the edge of the ruins on a cold morning in early spring, his boots crunching over blackened wood and cracked stone, his leather satchel heavy with the deed, and a blank ledger he had brought for a purpose no one would expect. The surviving orc women, 11 of them, watched him from the remains of what might have been a communal hall, their green faces marked with soot and suspicion, their children clinging to their skirts, and Yannick knew exactly what they were thinking because he had seen that look 100 times before. Here comes the human who will finish what the fire started. He had made his fortune on ruin. For 15 years, Yannick Vance had traveled the western frontier, buying up burned villages, abandoned homesteads, plague-emptied towns, always arriving with cash in hand while the ash was still warm, always offering just enough that desperate survivors took the deal, always selling the land 6 months later to timber companies or cattle barons for 3 times what he paid. He was good at it, efficient and fair within the letter of the law, and he had never broken a contract or cheated a single seller. He had also never once asked why the land was ruined, never questioned who set the fires or whether the plague had helped spreading, never wondered about the families who scattered into the wilderness with nothing but the coins he handed them. The money had piled up, clean and legal, and the guilt had piled up alongside it, silent and smothering. Until one night 6 months ago he woke in his comfortable house in Milford and realized he could not remember the faces of any of the people whose desperation had made him rich. Thornbreak was meant to be different. Thornbreak was meant to be penance. Yannick walked toward the women slowly, keeping his hands visible and empty except for the ledger. They did not run, which told him they had nowhere else to go. The tallest of them stepped forward, a broad-shouldered woman with iron-gray streaks in her black hair and small tusks that jutted from her lower lip. Her eyes were the color of moss in shadow, and they tracked him with the wary calculation of someone who had survived by reading threats accurately. "You are the new owner," she said. It was not a question. "I am. My name is Yannick Vance. I bought the land and the village rights at auction yesterday in Milford." He stopped a respectful distance away, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough that he did not crowd them. "I want to know your names." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Why? So you can write them on eviction notices, so I can write them in this." Yannick held up the ledger. "I am hiring. I need workers to rebuild this village, and I am paying a living wage, 4 silver marks a week, plus room and board. You know this land. You know how to build here. I am offering you first claim on the jobs." The silence that followed was so complete he could hear the wind moving through the broken timbers. The gray-haired woman stared at him as though he had spoken in a language she did not know. Behind her, the other women shifted, whispering to each other in the orc tongue, their voices rising in confusion and disbelief. "You are joking," the woman said finally. "I am not. 4 silver marks a week, every week as long as you work. More for specialized skills like carpentry or masonry. I will pay for materials. I will pay for food until we can plant and harvest. You will rebuild your own village and I will pay you to do it." One of the younger women, rail thin with a baby on her hip, laughed bitterly. "And then you will sell it out from under us." Yannick met her eyes. "Probably. I am a land buyer, not a saint, but I will sell it to you at cost when you are ready to buy. Until then you work, you get paid, and you have a place to live. Those are my terms." The gray-haired woman crossed her arms. "Why? Because I can afford to, and because it needs doing." The answer was true, as far as it went, But Yannick did not mention the sleepless nights or the growing weight in his chest or the way his reflection had started to look like a stranger. "Do you want the work or not?" The woman studied him for a long moment, and Yannick had the unsettling sense that she was seeing past his words into the marrow of his intentions. Then she uncrossed her arms and held out a calloused hand. "My name is Farah Merak. I speak for the others, because my husband was the village elder before the militia killed him. If you are lying, I will know and you will regret it. If you are telling the truth, we will work and we will rebuild and we will hold you to every word. 4 silver marks a week is more than fair." Yannick shook her hand. Her grip was strong enough to crack walnuts and her palm was rough as tree bark. "Then let us start with names." They gathered in the shell of the communal hall, and Yannick wrote carefully as each woman gave her name. Farah spoke first, then the young mother with the baby, whose name was Tala Grish. There was Una Cragg, a stocky woman with a missing tooth and hands stained with dye from the tanning work she had done before the fire. There was Yelka Thrim, barely 19, with burned scars running up her left arm. There was Marga Solon, who had been the village midwife. There were 6 others, each with her own story written in scars and exhaustion, and Yannick recorded every name in clear, precise script. He also noted the children, 8 in total, ranging from Tala's infant to a boy of 12 who watched Yannick with the sullen mistrust of someone who had learned early that adults brought trouble. When the ledger was full, Yannick closed it and looked at the women. "We start tomorrow. Today I will ride to Milford and buy supplies. You will need tools, nails, timber, and food. Make me a list of what else you need." Farah tilted her head. "You trust us not to run off with your money. You have no money yet," Yannick pointed out. "And if you run, you run. I will find other workers, but I do not think you will run. You stayed when you had every reason to leave. That tells me you want your village back." Farah's expression softened just slightly into something that might have been respect. "We want our village back," she agreed. "And we will work until our hands bleed to get it. Your hands do not need to bleed. They just need to work." Yannick tucked the ledger into his satchel. "I will be back by nightfall." He rode to Milford and spent the afternoon in a frenzy of purchasing that left the suppliers baffled and delighted. He bought timber and nails and hammers and saws. He bought sacks of flour and oats and dried beans. He bought wool blankets and cookware and a sturdy iron stove. He bought seed for planting, wheat and barley and carrots and turnips. The merchant who sold him the stove, a barrel-shaped man named Oswin, squinted at the address on the delivery order and frowned. "Thornbreak. That is the orc village the militia burned. You setting up a camp there?" "Rebuilding," Yannick said curtly. "Delivery by tomorrow morning." Oswin's frown deepened. "You are hiring orcs. I am hiring workers. The orcs are workers. Is there a problem?" "No problem for me. My coin spends the same, but the landholders around Thornbreak are not going to like it. They pay their orc labor half what you are talking about if they pay at all. You start paying fair wages, they will see it as competition." Yannick had expected this. The western frontier ran on cheap labor, much of it extracted from orc communities who had no legal standing to demand fair treatment. Paying a living wage was not just generous, it was a threat to the entire system. "The landholders can pay their workers what they want. I will pay mine what I want." Oswin shrugged. "Your funeral. Delivery by morning." Yannick returned to Thornbreak as the sun was setting, his saddlebags heavy with the first load of supplies. The women had spent the day clearing debris, and he could already see the difference. A section of the village square had been swept clean, and the timbers that were too burned to salvage had been stacked in a neat pile for firewood. Farah met him at the edge of the ruins, her face streaked with ash but her eyes bright with something that might have been hope. The supplies will arrive tomorrow, Yannick said. I bought enough to get started. We will need more as we go, but it is a beginning. Farah nodded. We have been talking. The children need a school, the well needs to be cleared. The houses need roofs before the spring rains start. Where do we start? We start with the well, Yannick said. No water, no work. After that, the communal hall so we have shelter. Then the houses. The school comes after, he paused. I will work alongside you. I am not just the owner, I am part of this. Farah raised an eyebrow. You know how to swing a hammer. I grew up on a farm. I know which end of the hammer to hold. Good, we will see tomorrow if that is true. The next weeks blurred into a rhythm of labor and incremental progress. The supplies arrived as promised, and Yannick paid the delivery men extra to help unload. The well was cleared first, a brutal job that required hauling up buckets of debris and dead ash while standing waist deep in cold, filthy water. Yannick worked beside Farah, both of them soaked and shivering, while the other women hauled the buckets up and dumped them. When they finally hit clean water, Tala let out a whoop of joy, and even the children cheered. The communal hall came next. The stone walls had survived the fire, but the roof was gone, and the floor was a mess of charred beams and broken tiles. Yannick hired a carpenter from Milford, a taciturn man named Petran who taught the women how to frame a roof properly, and did not flinch when Una proved better at cutting angles than he was. Within 2 weeks, the hall had a roof and a floor and a working stove, and the women moved their makeshift camp inside, out of the wind. The houses took longer. There had been 23 homes in Thornbreak before the fire, and all but 3 were unsalvageable. Yannick made the decision to rebuild smaller. 11 new houses, 1 for each family, plus a separate structure for the school. It was practical, but it also meant accepting that Thornbreak would never be what it had been. Farah understood. She stood with him one evening as they surveyed the empty plots where homes had stood, and her face was grave. My husband's house was there, she said, pointing to a spot near the eastern edge. We raised 3 sons in it. They are all dead now. 2 died in the border wars, 1 died in the fire. Yannick did not know what to say. I am sorry felt inadequate, and silence felt cruel, so he settled for, we will build you a new house. It will not replace what you lost, but it will be yours. Farah glanced at him. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? A human who saw us as animals, or as a charity project to make himself feel noble. She turned to face him fully. You are neither. You work as hard as any of us. You do not flinch when we speak our language or cook our food. You do not try to save us. You just pay us and let us do the work. Why? Yannick hesitated. The truth was complicated and ugly, and he was not sure he could explain it without sounding self-pitying. But Farah was watching him with those moss-colored eyes, patient and unyielding, and he realized she would wait as long as it took for an honest answer. I made my money buying ruined places, he said finally. Villages like this one, but also human villages. Anywhere there was desperation, I bought low and sold high. I never broke the law. I never cheated anyone. But I also never asked why the ruin happened, or whether I could have stopped it, or what happened to the people after I paid them and they left. I got rich on disaster, and I told myself it was just business. He looked down at his hands, which were blistered from hammerwork and stained with sawdust. 6 months ago, I realized I could not live with that anymore. I wanted to do something different, so I bought this place, and I decided to rebuild it instead of flipping it. I do not know if it makes up for anything, but it is what I can do. Farah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You are doing penance. Yes. Does it work? Do you feel forgiven? No, Yannick admitted, but I feel less like a ghost. Farah nodded slowly. That is something. By the end of the first month, The village had walls and roofs and a functioning well. The women worked with a ferocity that awed Yannick, waking before dawn and hammering nails until their hands cramped, plastering walls and cutting shingles and digging latrines with grim determination. He paid them every week, counting out the silver marks into their hands, and every week they took the money with the same mix of disbelief and fierce pride. Tala used her wages to buy a goat from a traveling merchant. Una bought fabric and sewed new clothes for the children. Farah bought seeds and planted a garden behind the communal hall, neat rows of turnips and carrots that she watered every evening. Yannick found himself watching Farah more and more. She was always moving, always working, her hands never idle. She organized the other women with quiet authority, settling disputes and assigning tasks, and making sure the children were fed and safe. She was also, he realized, brilliant. She had a gift for seeing how things fit together, for solving problems before they became disasters. When the roof of one of the new houses started to sag, it was Farah who spotted the weak beam and insisted they tear it down and rebuild. When a dispute broke out over who would live in which house, it was Farah who proposed drawing lots, fair and unchallengeable. Yannick had hired her as a laborer, but she was running the village, and she was doing it better than he ever could. He was also, he realized with a discomfort that kept him awake at night, falling in love with her. It was not a sudden thing. It crept up on him in small moments. The way she laughed at Tala's baby when the child tried to eat a fistful of mud, the way she sang quietly while she worked, the way her face softened when she looked at the new houses and saw the village coming back to life. She was strong and tired and fiercely intelligent, and she carried her grief like a cloak she refused to take off. Yannick had no idea if she saw him as anything other than the human who paid her wages, and he told himself it did not matter. This was not about romance. This was about rebuilding a village and maybe, if he was lucky, rebuilding a small corner of his own soul. But then one evening, after a long day of framing the schoolhouse, Farah sat down beside him on the steps of the communal hall and handed him a cup of tea. It was bitter and herbal, an orc blend he had learned to tolerate, and he drank it gratefully while they watched the sun set over the new rooftops. "You are a better man than you think you are," Farah said quietly. Yannick almost choked on the tea. "I am not. You are. You see yourself as someone who profited from suffering, and that is true. But you are also someone who stopped, who chose to do something different, who is trying to make it right. That takes courage, or guilt. Courage and guilt are not opposites. They often walk together." Farah sipped her own tea. "My husband used to say that a person is not defined by their worst day or their best day, but by what they do with all the days in between. You are using your days well now. That matters." Yannick looked at her, at the gray in her hair and the scars on her hands and the steadiness in her eyes. "What are you using your days for? Survival? Rebuilding? Making sure my people have a future?" She paused. "And maybe learning to trust again. It is hard. The militia that burned this place, they were supposed to protect us. The humans who lived nearby, they stood by and watched it happen. I thought I knew who the monsters were, but it turned out the monsters wore uniforms and called themselves righteous. You are the first human in a long time who has done what he promised. It is strange. Strange good or strange bad," Farah smiled, a small, weary expression that did not quite reach her eyes. "Strange hopeful. I was not expecting that." The trouble started at the end of the second month, when a delegation of landholders from the neighboring estates arrived unannounced. There were 4 of them, all human men dressed in fine wool and riding expensive horses, and they rode into Thornbreak with the easy arrogance of people who were used to getting their way. Yannick was working on the roof of the schoolhouse when they arrived, and he climbed down the ladder slowly, wiping sawdust from his hands and mentally preparing for a fight. The leader of the group was a man named Corwin Hale, who owned the largest estate within 20 miles. He was tall and handsome in a cold, patrician way, and his smile did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Vance, we have heard interesting things about your little project here. Have you?" Yannick kept his voice neutral. "Indeed. Word is you are paying orcs 4 silver marks a week. That is generous." "Perhaps too generous." Corwin glanced around the village, taking in the new roofs and the bustling workers. "It sets a dangerous precedent. Dangerous for whom? For the entire region. We rely on orc labor for the harvests, for the timber camps, for the quarries. If they start expecting fair wages, our costs go up, our profits go down. You understand?" Yannick crossed his arms. "I understand that you rely on exploiting people who have no legal power to demand better. I also do not care. I pay my workers what they are worth." "What you pay yours is your business." Corwin's smile thinned. "It becomes our business when your workers start talking to ours, when they start asking why they are not paid the same, when they start refusing to work unless we match your wages. You are disrupting the entire labor market, Mr. Vance. That is a problem. Then pay your workers fairly and it stops being a problem." One of the other men, a red-faced landholder named Brant, spoke up. "You are being naive. Orcs are not like us. They do not need the same things we do. They live rough. They eat less. Paying them what you would pay a human is wasteful." Yannick felt his temper rise, but before he could respond, Farah stepped forward. She had been working on the schoolhouse roof with him, and she climbed down the ladder and crossed the square to stand beside him. Her face was calm, but her eyes were hard as stone. "You are lying," she said flatly. "We eat the same as you. We need shelter the same as you. We bleed the same as you. You pay us less because you can, not because we need less. And Mr. Vance is showing the world that you are thieves." Brant's face went from red to purple. "How dare you?" "I dare because I am standing on my own land in my own village, being paid an honest wage for honest work. You are the ones trespassing. Leave." Corwin held up a hand, cutting off Brant's spluttering. "We did not come here to argue. We came to negotiate. Mr. Vance, you are a businessman. You understand that cooperation is better than conflict. We are willing to make you a very generous offer. We will buy Thornbreak from you at twice what you paid. You walk away with a profit, we resolve the wage issue quietly, and everyone is happy." "No," Yannick said. "Think about it, no. I am not selling. The women here are working to buy the village themselves. When they are ready, I will sell it to them at cost. Until then, this village is not for sale, and neither am I." Corwin's smile vanished. "You are making a mistake. We are not your enemies, Mr. Vance, but we can be. The road to Milford runs through our land. The river that feeds your well crosses our property. If we decide to make things difficult for you, we can. Think carefully about whether you want to make enemies of every landholder in the region." Yannick stepped forward, closing the distance until he was standing a foot from Corwin's horse. "If you cut off our water or block our road, I will take you to court. I have the deed to this land. I have contracts with every worker here. I have receipts for every penny I have spent. You want to fight me legally, go ahead. I have been dealing with land law for 15 years, and I will bury you in paperwork." Corwin stared at him for a long moment, and Yannick saw the calculation in his eyes, weighing the cost of a legal fight against the cost of letting Thornbreak set a precedent. Finally, Corwin nodded. "We will see, Mr. Vance. Good day." The landholders rode away, and Yannick watched them go with a sinking feeling in his gut. He had made enemies today, powerful ones, and he suspected they would not give up so easily. Farah touched his arm. "You should have taken the offer." "No. They will come after us. They will find ways to hurt us. Probably. But selling would mean abandoning you, and I am not doing that. Yannick met her eyes. I told you I would pay you to rebuild this village, and I meant it. I do not break my word. Farah's expression softened. You are a stubborn man. So I have been told. The retaliation started within the week. A merchant who had been supplying them with flour sent a terse message saying he could no longer fulfill their order. The blacksmith who had been repairing their tools suddenly doubled his prices. When Yannick rode to Milford to complain, he found that every supplier he spoke to had the same story. They could not afford to anger the landholders, and doing business with Thornbreak was now a liability. Yannick paid the inflated prices and found new suppliers farther afield, but it was clear that Corwin and his allies were tightening the noose. The worst blow came 2 weeks later, when a letter arrived from the Regional Water Authority. It was dry and bureaucratic, full of legal jargon, but the message was clear. The spring that fed Thornbreak's well was located on land owned by Corwin Hale, and he was exercising his right to restrict its use. Effective immediately, Thornbreak was prohibited from drawing more than 10 gallons of water per day. 10 gallons was barely enough to keep 11 women and 8 children alive, let alone support a working village. Yannick read the letter twice, his hands shaking with fury, and then he rode straight to Corwin's estate and demanded to speak with him. Corwin received him in a lavish sitting room, sipping wine and looking utterly untroubled. I warned you, Corwin said. You chose not to listen. You are condemning them to die of thirst. I am exercising my legal rights. The water comes from my land. I decide who uses it. If you want access, you can pay for it. Let us say 1 silver mark per gallon. It was extortion, plain and simple. At that price, they would go broke within a month. Yannick forced himself to stay calm. I will take this to court. Go ahead. The courts around here are slow. It will take months, maybe years, to get a judgment. By then, your little project will be dust. Yannick left without another word, his mind racing. He needed a solution, and he needed it fast. When he returned to Thornbreak, he found Farah waiting for him, her arms crossed and her face grim. They cut off our water, she said. It was not a question. Yes, I am going to fight it in court, but it will take time. We do not have time. The well will run dry in a week at this rate. Yannick nodded. Then we dig a new well. Where? The only other water sources are miles away. There is a stream on the far edge of the property near the southern boundary. It is a long walk, but it is on land I own, not Corwin's. If we dig a well there, he cannot stop us. Farah frowned. That stream is seasonal. It runs dry in summer. Then we dig deep. We find the underground water and we tap it. It is possible, Farah. Hard, but possible. Farah studied him, and Yannick saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of too many battles fought and too many losses endured. But he also saw something else, a flicker of determination, stubborn and unyielding. All right, she said. We dig. The next month was the hardest of Yannick's life. They hauled tools and supplies to the southern boundary and started digging, working in shifts around the clock. The ground was rocky and unforgiving, and progress was measured in inches. Yannick hired a well digger from a town 3 days' ride away, a grizzled woman named Saskia who took one look at the site and said it would take a miracle to find water. But she dug anyway, and the women of Thornbreak dug alongside her, their hands blistering and their backs aching. Farah worked harder than anyone. She was down in the pit every day, hauling up buckets of rock and dirt, her face streaked with sweat and her breath coming in ragged gasps. Yannick tried to convince her to rest, but she refused. This is my village, she said. I will not sit idle while others do the work. Yannick understood. This was not just about water. This was about survival, about proving that they could not be broken, about rebuilding something that had been stolen from them. He worked beside her, hauling buckets and shoring up the pit walls, and when they finally hit water at 30 feet, the cheer that went up was loud enough to wake the dead. They built a proper well, lined with stone and capped with a windlass, and the water that came up was cold and clean and sweet. It was not as convenient as the old well in the village square, but it was theirs, untouchable by Corwin or anyone else. Yannick stood at the edge of the new well with Farah, both of them filthy and exhausted, and felt something shift in his chest. They had fought and they had won, and it mattered. "You did it," Farah said quietly. "We did it," Yannick corrected. Farah looked at him, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes that was not suspicion or gratitude or wary respect. It was warmth, soft and tentative, like the first thaw after a long winter. She reached out and took his hand, her calloused palm rough against his. "Thank you," she said, "for fighting, for staying, for not giving up on us." Yannick squeezed her hand. "I am not going anywhere." With the water crisis resolved, Yannick turned his attention to the legal fight. He hired a lawyer in the regional capital, a sharp-eyed woman named Eliza Trent, who specialized in land disputes. She reviewed the case and told him bluntly that it would be difficult. Water rights were tangled and archaic, and the courts favored established landholders over newcomers. But she also saw weaknesses in Corwin's claim. The spring that fed the old well was not entirely on his land. A portion of it crossed into what had been communal village land, which Yannick now owned. If they could prove that, they could argue for shared water rights. It took months. Eliza filed motions and subpoenaed records, and dug up century-old surveys that proved the spring's exact boundaries. Corwin fought back, hiring his own lawyers and dragging the case out with procedural delays. Meanwhile, Thornbreak kept building. The schoolhouse was finished, and Marga, who had been a teacher before the fire, started holding classes for the children. The houses were completed, one by one, and the women moved in with a joy that was almost painful to witness. Tala hung curtains in her windows. Una planted flowers in her yard. Yelka, who had been so quiet and traumatized at the start, laughed for the first time when her little brother caught a frog in the new well. Yannick moved into one of the smaller houses, the one at the edge of the village that had been meant for storage. It was a single room with a sleeping loft, modest and plain, and it felt more like home than his house in Milford ever had. Farah visited him there one evening, bringing bread she had baked and a jar of honey she had traded for in town. They sat by his small fire and ate in comfortable silence, and Yannick realized with a start that this was what he had been searching for all his life. Not wealth or status or absolution, but simply this, the quiet companionship of someone who understood him. "I have been thinking," Farah said, breaking the silence. "When we win the water rights case, when the village is stable, what will you do?" "I do not know. Stay, I suppose, unless you want me to leave." "I do not want you to leave, but I am asking what you want." "You have spent months working on this village, paying us, fighting for us. But what do you get out of it? You said you were doing penance, but penance has to end eventually. What comes after?" Yannick stared into the fire, trying to put the tangled mess of his feelings into words. "I think I want a life. Not the life I had before, where I was rich and empty and half asleep. A real life, where I work with my hands and know the people around me and go to bed tired but satisfied. I want to be part of something, not just someone who profits from it." He looked at her. "I want to be part of this village, if you will have me." Farah smiled, and it was the first real smile he had seen from her, wide and unguarded and beautiful. "We will have you, you have earned it." "And you?" Yannick asked. "What do you want?" Farah was quiet for a long moment. "I want to stop being afraid. I want to believe that what we are building will last, that no one will come and burn it down again. I want to trust that the people around me will keep their promises." She met his eyes. "You have kept yours. That means more than you know." Yannick reached out and took her hand, and this time she did not let go. The court case was decided on a cold day in late autumn. Yannick and Farah rode to the regional capital together, a 2-day journey through rain and mud, and sat in the back of a crowded courtroom while Eliza presented their case. Corwin's lawyers argued that the spring was entirely on his land and that he had the right to restrict access. Eliza countered with maps and surveys and testimony from an old surveyor who confirmed that the spring straddled the boundary. The judge, a stern woman with steel-gray hair, listened to both sides and then retired to deliberate. When she returned, her verdict was measured and precise. The spring was indeed on shared land, and both parties had a right to its water. Corwin could not restrict access to Thornbreak, and any attempt to do so would be considered theft of common resources. Furthermore, the judge ordered Corwin to pay Thornbreak's legal fees, a sum that made Eliza grin like a wolf. Yannick and Farah left the courtroom in a daze, hardly believing they had won. They celebrated that night in a small inn, drinking too much cider and laughing until they cried. Farah grabbed Yannick's hands across the table and said, "We did it. We actually did it." "You did it," Yannick said. "You fought for your village. I just paid the bills." "You did more than that. You gave us a chance when no one else would. You treated us like people, not problems." "That is not nothing." Yannick felt his throat tighten. "I am trying to be better than I was." "You are." Farah leaned across the table and kissed him, quick and fierce, and then pulled back with a startled look as though she had surprised herself. "Sorry, I did not mean, do not apologize." Yannick stood and walked around the table, pulling her to her feet. "Do it again." She did, slower this time, her tusks brushing against his lips, her hands strong and warm on his shoulders. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and Yannick felt like his heart might burst. "I love you," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know this is not the right time, and I know I am not what you expected, but I love you, Farah. I think I have loved you since the day you told me you would work until your hands bled." Farah's eyes were bright with tears. "I love you too. I did not want to. I was afraid to. But you are stubborn and kind and you keep your promises, and I cannot help it. I love you." They held each other in that small inn room, two people who had been broken in different ways and had found, against all odds, a way to be whole together. They returned to Thornbreak as a couple, and if the other women were surprised, they hid it well. Tala teased them mercilessly, and Una made pointed comments about wedding plans, but mostly the village carried on as it always had, working, building, living. The victory in court had secured their water rights, and with that security came new opportunities. The women voted to incorporate the village as a cooperative, with each of them holding an equal share. Yannick transferred ownership of the land to the cooperative for the exact amount he had paid at auction, and the women repaid him from their collective savings, the wages he had been paying them for nearly a year. Thornbreak was no longer his. It belonged to the women who had rebuilt it, and Yannick found that he did not mind. This was what he had wanted all along, not to own but to be part of something. The village thrived. They planted crops in the spring, and the harvest that autumn was modest but sufficient. Merchants who had been afraid to deal with them before began to return, drawn by the quality of their work and the reputation of their cooperative. The children grew and learned, and the schoolhouse rang with laughter. New families began to arrive, orc families who had heard about the village where people were paid fairly and treated with respect, and the cooperative voted to welcome them. Yannick and Farah were married in the spring. a simple ceremony in the village square with all of Thornbreak in attendance. There was no priest, no grand ritual, just the two of them standing before their neighbors and making promises. Farah wore a dress dyed deep blue, the color of twilight, and Yannick wore the best clothes he owned, which were still patched and work-stained. Tala's baby cried through the vows, and the 12-year-old boy who had once glared at Yannick with suspicion played a flute, the notes high and sweet. They built a house together, larger than Yannick's old storage room but still modest, with a garden in back and a wide porch in front. Farah planted herbs and vegetables, and Yannick built a workshop where he repaired tools for the village. They fell into a rhythm, working side by side during the day and sitting together on the porch in the evenings, watching the village they had built together. One evening, as they sat and watched the sun set over the rooftops, Farah said, "Do you ever regret it? Giving up your old life?" Yannick thought about his house in Milford, empty and waiting, and the pile of money sitting in a bank that he rarely touched. He thought about the years he had spent buying and selling ruin, profiting from desperation and the hollowness that had filled him. "No," he said, "this is the only life I want." Farah rested her head on his shoulder. "Good, because I am not letting you go." The years passed, marked by harvests and winters and the slow, steady growth of the village. Thornbreak became known throughout the region, not as a ruin or a charity project, but as a thriving cooperative where people worked hard and were treated fairly. Other villages began to follow their model, and Yannick found himself traveling to give advice, helping communities incorporate and negotiate fair wages. He never charged for the work. It felt right to give freely what he had learned. Farah served as the elected head of the cooperative for 3 terms before stepping down to focus on teaching. She was a patient, exacting instructor, and the children of Thornbreak learned not just reading and arithmetic but history and ethics, and the importance of standing up for themselves. Yannick often sat in on her classes, marveling at the way she could take a complex idea and make it simple without making it small. They did not have children of their own, though they talked about it sometimes. Farah said she had raised 3 sons already and buried them all, and the grief of that was still too raw. Yannick understood. Instead, they became guardians to the village children, helping Tala with her growing brood and teaching Yelka's younger siblings how to read. It was enough. It was more than enough. On a warm summer evening, 20 years after Yannick had first walked into the ruins of Thornbreak, he sat on the porch with Farah and looked out at the village. The houses were well maintained, their gardens lush and green. The schoolhouse had been expanded twice. The communal hall hosted dinners and dances and town meetings. The well in the village square had been restored, now that they owned the water rights, and children played around it, their laughter echoing off the stone. "We did something good here," Farah said quietly. Yannick took her hand, her palm still rough and calloused despite the years. "We did. No regrets, none, and it was true." He had come to Thornbreak seeking penance, but he had found something far better, a life that mattered, work that had meaning, and love that had grown slowly and rooted deep. He had spent years profiting from ruin, and he had spent the rest of his life building something new from the ashes. It was not a grand redemption, no dramatic absolution, just the quiet satisfaction of waking up each day and knowing that he had done something that mattered. Farah squeezed his hand. "I am glad you stayed. I am glad you let me." They sat together as the sun set, 2 people who had found each other in the ruins and had built a home, a village, and a life worth living. The wind carried the scent of herbs and wood smoke, and somewhere in the distance, someone was singing. It was not a perfect world, and Thornbreak was not a perfect village, but it was theirs, built with hard work and fair wages and the stubborn belief that people deserved better. And that, Yannick thought, was enough. The stars came out one by one, bright and clear in the darkening sky, and Yannick and Farah sat and watched them together, content and whole, in the village they had saved and the life they had made, surrounded by the people they loved and the work they had done, and the future stretching out before them, full of promise and hope and all the days still to come.